Hey there, it's Mr. Larry, and today on Mr. Larry's Crap. Oh wait, she might think I'm saying hi to her.
Oh, it's good to stretch sometimes. It just helps everything.
Hey there, it's Mr. Larry, and thank you so much for joining me again on Mr. Larry's Craft Show. Today, we are talking about cross-stitching. It's basically a type of embroidery. In fact, you might say it's one of the foundational levels of embroidery, and we'll talk about where it comes from and why it's so prominent right now. And then perhaps you could turn that into a project like this lovely pillow of my idol that was embroidered by a friend of mine several years ago. And then I transferred it to a pillow so that it can always be near my heart. Cross-stitching is a very easy craft to do. I hope you're sensing a pattern here. Before we get started with this project, there are 3 things that I think you should know before we get started. Girl. So it's another day in the workroom and we're all feeling like fine and whatever. And like Mr. Larry is here to teach us how to cross stitch. So I'm like, what's going on? Thing number 1. Cross-stitching as we know it came to prominence in the 1960s where it was marketed as a leisure activity, mostly targeting women. However, we can trace cross-stitching and needlework in general back to the dawn of civilization. In the 16th and 17th centuries, samplers were used to practice and to replicate stitches, and this was especially important for young women of the time who were often given the responsibility of making or mending clothing. Because of this, the practice was widespread. And that brings us to thing number 2. The materials that are typically used for any cross-stitch project are usually about the same. The first of our list of materials would be the Aida cloth. Aida cloth is an even weave cloth specifically designed to create spaces for you to stitch through. This comes in many colors and different textures. Most people will use this cloth to design everything from tea towels to pillows, clothing, and more. Next is our floss. Floss is the name that is given to the thread that we use to actually produce the stitches. It comes in an explosive variety of colors. You will typically use a couple of strands at a time, depending on what. I'm so distracted because I'm not used to seeing people. I hope y'all are wearing masks though. People have made everything from single color stitches to beautifully intricate photorealistic projects. Another thing you'll need are needles. The needles typically used for cross-stitching are blunt. It's noticeably duller. Sometimes they're even thicker than you might expect for like a sewing needle. And then the eye is also typically larger because the floss that we're using, this is why you gotta wear a mask, because the floss that we're using is thicker than thread. You'll also need something to put your fabric on. So you can use a hoop or you can stitch it onto a stretcher post system. Embroidery and cross-stitching hoops come in a variety of sizes, colors, materials. So there's a lot of different ways that you can display your beautiful works of art once you finish it. I will show you how to do it on a hoop today because if you get a kit, it already comes with one, and if not, you can get these for pennies at any craft store near you. Thing number 3. Squirrel! Hi! Do you want to be on my show? Aw. Okay, but don't come in my house. Squirrel is back. Cross stitches come back into prominence as an activity for so many people because it has a quirky sense of humor that a lot of people like to subvert. So you can do anything you want with them, really. Because of this, the tools that you need are readily available for you. Cross stitch is very time consuming. Thus, it's a fun project to do while you're watching TV, when you have a lot of downtime, like during pandemics and things. I don't know what's going on, but these other girls better watch out because I came ready to cross stitch. Oh, start your engines and may the best crafter win.
So the kit that I have is for the I Can't Adult Today design, and this is what those instructions look like. You'll note that each color used in the design correlates to a different symbol. Down here at the bottom it states that the star represents the dark green color. It also gives you instructions on how to actually set the job up and how to make the stitches as well, but they can seem a little complicated. I'm going to start making my own pattern here. I'm just going to use an X to represent each of the stitches that I need to make, and I'm using this grid paper since it's laid out just like our Aida cloth. I'm going to sort of freehand this design, but this is the basis of it. I'll also be using a darker colored Aida cloth in this navy with these colors of floss. I'll start by cutting my Aida cloth to size. That's usually just about an inch extra on each side of the hoop that I intend to use, and then I'll press that out off camera. I made a small mark of the center of this piece, and I'm going to place the outer ring so that the center of that mark and the outer ring are aligned, and then flip that whole thing over. From here, I'll take the inner hoop and press it into the fabric and into the outer hoop. From here, I'll start to tug and pull on the edges and make sure that those two hoops are flush aligned together, and then that the fabric inside is nice and tight. I'll use the screw posts to tighten the outer ring around it, and then just double check that the fabric is as tight as I can get it. If your outer hoop doesn't close all the way, that's not a big deal. Sometimes they have a small gap at the top, and that's perfectly okay. I'm going to trim my floss to about 8 inches. You'll notice if you just slightly untwist the floss, it's actually several threads twisted together. You'll need 2 of these, but you must select them out one at a time. By holding the rest of the floss and then pulling out the one strand, you'll easily separate them out. If you try to do more than one at a time, you'll end up with a big tangled mess. So get 2 of those, and then we're going to put them both through the eye of our needle at the same time. You can use a threader if you need to, but these are pretty large eyes, so you may be able to do it without the aid of one. Make sure that you leave a couple of inches of a tail that you can grip with your fingers as you pass through the fabric. And then pushing through the back of the fabric, find your space, your first space, and then pull your needle all the way through, making sure to leave another small tail on the back side. If you flip it over, you should see a couple of inches left, and I just like to hold that in place with my finger for the time being. I'll eventually tuck that into some other stitches. So I've begun to make the first part of my diagonal in this grid. I've tried to make a little illustration here to show you guys what that grid looks like. You have those 4 holes. I'm making a cross from one corner to the bottom opposite corner, and that gives me this stitch here. I'm going to do the same thing for a series of stitches until I decide to turn back, and then I'll go the opposite direction. So following my little heart pattern, I'm going to go down 3 more of these stitches before I turn around and then start to go a different direction. At this point, I'll start making the opposite directional stitch, which gives you the full X or the full cross. And that is 1 completed stitch. That's 2, and then this will be the 3rd. I'm going to continue on this design. I have to fill several more squares on this side, and I'll just continue to do that, making sure that each of my strokes, the first stroke I make is the same direction, and then the second stroke is all the same direction. Most people will do this instinctively anyway, but it makes for a much neater cross-stitch job if you pay attention to that and make a decision about which directions you want to use right away. You'll also notice that I'm tucking my tail under some of the subsequent stitches so that then later I'll trim that off and it won't be an issue at all. There's no real science to which direction you go in along the path of your stitches. I just like to do whatever makes the most sense and allows you to use the thread that you have. Obviously, you don't want to go very far away and then come back and then very far away again, because that's going to make for a much messier piece on the back side. But just be strategic. It's sort of like playing Tetris as you go. Once I finish this shape, I'm just going to trim off those excess threads. They've all been tucked into other stitches, so they shouldn't move or anything like that. And there we have our first finished heart. From here, I'll use the same pattern and just sort of fill in some more space around that initial heart. I'm switching colors of thread, so I'll just do the same thing I did before until I have a finished product. I've used those same 3 colors throughout and just tried to make something that looked fun and sparkly. The last thing I have to do is trim off the excess Aida cloth from the back of my hoop. I'm just using a pair of fabric scissors and a little patience. Just slowly trim around the edges, and that should get a pretty clean cut. And now it's ready to hang. I usually hang mine with just a single nail. You might want to use something fancier or prettier, but I think this looks just nice the way it is.
Thank you so much for joining me today on Mr. Larry's Craft Show. I hope that you had a good time. And if you have suggestions or ideas on what we might do next week, please send them my way. I'd love to hear them. Be sure to share this video with your friends, your family, your kids and grandkids. And don't forget to like and subscribe, please. And I'll see you guys next week. Bye. Yeah, it's nice to finally be here. People have been waiting for me to be on the show for years. It would have been earlier, but like honestly, it just wasn't my time. But like now I'm ready to fight. I'm ready to be in it. I'm here. I know how to cross stitch already. So these other girls better watch out.